I want to look at, kind of with fresh eyes, the story of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost sheep that Jesus tells. And the reason I say that story is because I think if Jesus were telling the story today, he would use a lost pet. Because we know deep down that if we had a beloved pet that was lost, we would want to frantically search and find that pet. He'd probably use a cat or a dog, because we would feel the same way if we lost a dog. I got to really find this dog. Back then, he uses sheep, and that's probably because, particularly in southern Palestine, there was sheep in the ancient Near East like everywhere. There were shepherds everywhere, lots of sheep. You could literally, he's probably telling the story, he could probably be gesturing to a hill, talking about the sheep story, and everyone's looking at a shepherd literally a few yards away, or at least potentially, possibly. But this parable is going to talk about God and his relentless love for each of us. I want to take a look at this parable. Luke 15, the first 7 verses here. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them," which is going to be, again, pertinent here in a moment. Verse 3. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and he goes home, and he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So again, you can kind of imagine him kind of gesturing. Hey, you see that shepherd over there? He's got these 100 sheep in his possession. If he's bedding them down at night and he's counting them and he only gets to 99 and he realizes there's one of them that's lost, what does he do? Does he not leave the 99 to go find the lost one? And also, it's very pertinent to know that he's talking specifically about being lost, and the idea there is of in the wilderness. And the wilderness is, he says the open country there, in verse 4. The idea of the wilderness is pertinent there because, I don't know why I keep using the word pertinent, but because the wilderness was where danger was in the ancient Near East. That's what danger and death were out there in the wilderness. That was the scary place, was the wilderness. And there's things out there like mountain lions and snakes in the wilderness, wolves that are going to devour these sheep if we don't go get them. You think about the psalmist David writing through the valley of the shadow of death, that same concept of the danger and death that lurks out there. And by the way, I think it's always important to recognize any parable that we read, we're searching for ourselves in there. And I think there's a reason that Jesus would want us to do that in this parable, that he wants us in some ways to put our feet in the sandals of a shepherd who is going to search for lost people, but he's also wanting to put us in the role of the sheep as well. We're a lot like sheep. Sheep are social creatures. Sheep need to be around other sheep. Also, sheep have really a need for a shepherd to lead them because they are phenomenally dumb animals. And the truth of the matter is, a sheep sees any sort of opening in a fence, and what are they going to do? They're going to try to get through it. It doesn't even really matter. I mean, you could say they're trying to get through because the grass is greener on the other side. Honestly, a sheep doesn't even care about that. They're not even smart enough to think about that. They just are like, hey, there's a hole. I'll try to get through it. Sheep get stuck all the time. If they get to themselves in a certain position, they can't get up. It is just this crazy idea that, they can get themselves in trouble in the easiest ways, which is, again, why I can relate to a sheep so well. Because I, too, can get myself in trouble in the slightest ways. I, too, am kind of thinking at all times, is there something different over there? Is there something better over there? Is there somewhere else I could go check out? Is there somewhere I need to be and some different thing I could be doing? My mind tends to wander that way. Some new experience that might make me happy. In that way, I'm very much like a sheep. Maybe you are too. And here's another way that I'm like a sheep, and maybe you are too, and that is sheep have a tendency to nibble their way lost. A dog sometimes will, you open the door and the dog will sprint out the door, right? Sheep aren't really like that. If they're going to get lost, they're not going to get lost at a full dead sprint. they're just going to do a little nibble here, and then a little nibble over here, and then a little nibble over here. Before they know it, they look up and they are away from the rest of the sheep. And maybe you have been there in life. You nibbled your way lost. Maybe you're there right now. It can be subtle, but we worry about our loved ones when they're nibbling, in these pastures they shouldn't be for that very reason. Why? Right? Because we know how easily they can get lost. Sometimes I'll have this thing happen to me here at Pleasant Ridge. Pleasant Ridge is interesting. It's a very tricky sized church. Some people will hear the size of our church and they'll be like, "Oh, it's I didn't know it was that big." I hear that. In fact, I heard that from someone yesterday. Didn't realize it was that big. To some people, it's a very big church. To some people, they don't think of Pleasant Ridge as very big. It's a tricky size in this, and I think that if you want to get lost here, you can. We're just big enough where this is what will happen. Someone will ask me about someone. "Hey, have you seen so-and-so in a little while?" And we're just big enough that I'll have to think about it. I'll have to really think about it. Because it's not like, I used to preach at a church of 20 people. I could tell you like that if they were here or not. We're not that way. We're just too big for me to just kind of know off the top of my head. And maybe you find that. But I find that people all the time, will even tell me when they've been away for a little while. And they'll say something like, "Yeah, we hope to be back in church soon. We were all sick this one week. And then we're out of town. And then, we kind of got busy. And before we knew it, we'd been away. And it's been 4 months. And suddenly, they don't feel connected to God. They feel lost. They wonder how they got lost. Again, a lot of people don't intentionally get lost. They just nibble their way to lost. It happens to a lot of people. We have good intentions. We don't want to be lost. But there are things that are attractive or distracting or something that's interesting, and we nibble our way there. The Bible talks about this. Isaiah 53. Maybe you've never thought about it like this, but it says this. The prophet says, "We all like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way." And I think of that verse. I've used that verse many times to talk about the fallen nature of man, but I've never really thought about the metaphor. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. We all have nibbled our way lost a time or two. All of us can get lost when we're not paying attention. Now, back to the parable itself, going into the context. Now, Luke has a much bigger context that he's writing about here, but he also mentions right off the bat at the top of this chapter these religious leaders that are specifically asking these questions. And the reason that Jesus told this parable was because they themselves were very lost. They had forgotten what true faith was all about. They had forgotten what loving God was all about. They had become self-righteous. They had become arrogant. They had become selfish. They had forgotten about God's love for people. They certainly didn't embrace the promise that God's people were supposed to be a blessing for other people. And so our text for today says the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining because Jesus was hanging around sinners, and Jesus responds to their misguided attitudes by telling them not just this parable, but 2 other parables. And he tells them this parable, and the question that is so pertinent is, when people go astray, don't you, out of love, go searching for them until you find them so you can bring them back? And if you're those religious leaders, the answer to that is no. If they're lost, that's their problem. If they made their bed like that, they have to sleep in it. And also, why would we leave 99 healthy sheep to go off for one lost sheep? That doesn't make any sense. And also, there are wolves and there are predators out there. If we go searching for them in places like that, we ourselves are risking our lives. The religious leaders are concerned about keeping themselves and the 99 comfortable instead of finding the lost sheep. And Jesus came and he said, I've got the opposite attitude. He was concerned with those who were lost. He said, that's why I'm here, to seek and to save the lost. He cared about the 99, but he felt that it was the job of the 99 to help him seek and save the lost. And you see that truth all throughout the Gospels, that we are here to help draw other people closer to God. And the religious leaders in the story, they had forgotten that. The sobering truth is that so often many churches today forget this. It is so easy to get caught up in agendas and plans and comforts and programs that we forget that we exist for this one purpose and one purpose only, to join Jesus in his mission, in seeking and saving the lost. You couldn't come in this auditorium tonight without walking underneath the words to lead people into a life-changing walk with Jesus Christ. We exist to help Jesus give hope to people whose life feel lifeless and hopeless. We exist to give hope to the left out and the thrown out and the down and out. We are here to help Jesus heal the broken people and the beaten people and the bruised people. And this is what we are about, because this is what Jesus was about. And let me tell you something. If you are a church and this is not what you're about, then you are not a church. You are an event center or an education building or a recreation facility. You are something, but you are certainly not a church if your mission isn't to seek and save lost people. But I also want to say this. I am so proud of this church of Pleasant Ridge. I wear it right here proudly this time of year, because we here at Pleasant Ridge, so many people get this, that we have this desire to seek and save lost people, that we are willing to do what it takes to reach the lost for Jesus. And I believe that you get this because you know the kind of God that we serve. We serve a God who does leave the 99, which is why, you're also seeking God in parables. It's why you put him in the sandals of the shepherd who goes out to seek and save the lost, especially from the predators. It's the kind of God that we have. Jesus gives this beautiful picture in the parable of what happens when the shepherd finally grabs the sheep. Which, by the way, if you think about the three parables, the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son, in this chapter of Luke, each of them includes this detail about rejoicing whenever what was lost is found. It talks about the woman who loses a coin and sweeps her house. She calls all of her friends together, and she's like, hey, let's celebrate this lost coin, was gone. And in this case, you have the shepherd who puts the sheep on his shoulders and rejoices. And you almost get this image, and maybe you've even seen a painting like this, where the sheep is just relaxing into the shepherd as he carries it back to the safety of the fold. There's just this beautiful picture of being found in this. And this is what Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 11. He says, I am the good shepherd. He says the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. So not only is he willing to leave the 99 and go out and search for the lost, but he's willing to put his own life on the line and literally sacrifice, lay down his life for his sheep. And that's what he did on the cross. On the cross, he takes a beating from the wolves, from the predators that seek to devour us. He took that punishment and he said, this is how much I love you. Come home. I love you. And God he's relentless in his search for us. He'll do anything, even die on a cross to save us, to bring us home. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how far you've wandered away. You're never outside the reach of God's love. Jesus says, you are of infinite worth to me. I love you beyond your imagination. Come home. So I think I've shared this story before many years ago, and before I share it tonight, I wanted to look into it to see if it really is true or not, if it's not one of those preacher stories. And I found that it was originally posted in a Guidepost magazine many years ago, but I did realize this is a true story because this woman, who's named Mary Ann Bird, she was born in the 1920s, and when she was born with multiple birth defects. She had a cleft palate, of course, that made her, a lot of things uncomfortable, but she also was deaf in one ear, and she had a disfigured face, and her feet were lopsided, which made it where it was difficult to walk, and she walked with a very strange gait. But Mary Ann said that the worst thing in her life was the ridicule that she received from her classmates whenever she was a child. We've all been there. Junior high years, you don't want to stand out. You especially don't want to stand out in the ways that Mary Ann did. Kids would torment her. They would tease her. They would mock her. And she said the worst day of the school year, the one she always dreaded, was the hearing test. Back then, what happens is the teacher would pull each pupil in and face away from them, and they would whisper in their ear as a whisper test to test their hearing. We have modern day ways of testing now. We don't need that. But back then, that's what they did. And she dreaded it because she couldn't hear what the teacher would be saying. And oftentimes she would just have to guess. She would always get it wrong, and then the kids would all laugh. Finally, Marianne said one day she was in a classroom, and she said, I finally was in a class with the best teacher in the school. Her name was Miss Leonard. And when the day of the hearing came test, of course, Marianne was terrified. And teachers usually whispered something that was, kind of, just arcane, something like, the sky is blue, or you have new shoes, or something like that. But it was time for Marianne's turn, and she came forward. And Miss Leonard knew which was her good ear, and so she leaned forward into her good ear, and she whispered, not the sky is blue, or you have new shoes. She whispered 7 words that must have come from God because they changed her life. The 7 words she whispered were, I wish you were my little girl. And Marianne said, when I heard that someone loved me and wanted me, it changed everything for me. And what Jesus is telling us in this parable is that God whispers in our ear today, I wish you were my child. I love you. Come home, little lamb. Come home. I want to close with the words from the 23rd Psalm that include the ones I had mentioned a moment ago. They say this, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Let's stand while we sing. I am a sheep and the Lord is my shepherd, watching over my soul to keep guarding over me ever, watching wherever I go. And when the winds blow, he is my shelter, and when I'm lost and alone, he rescues me. And when the lion comes, he is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. We are his children, and he is our Father, watching over our soul. Great is his love for his sons and his daughters, watching wherever we go. And when the winds blow, he is my shelter, and when I'm lost and alone, he rescues me. And when the lion comes, he is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. And when the winds blow, he is my shelter, and when I'm lost and alone, he rescues me. And when the lion comes, he is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me.